I'm calling to order this meeting. This is an additional meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. The time is 12:02 in the afternoon. This meeting is being held live in person in room 500 at the council chambers of the Johnny Wilson building, but it's also available, and there are several members participating virtually through the Zoom video conference broadcast platform. This meeting is being broadcast live on Council Channel 13 and is available on the council's website, which is www.dccouncil.gov. We have I believe, short committee of the whole meeting. It'll be followed by a legislative meeting. The legislative meeting will be the regular legislative meeting of the council for the month of May. Recognize Mr. Cash to call the roll to determine whether we have a quorum.
Chairman Mendelson,
Present.
Councilmember Allen. Here. Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Fruman.
Here.
Councilmember Gray.
Here.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Louis George.
Here.
Councilmember McDuffie. Councilmember Nadeau.
Here.
Councilmember Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Pinto.
Present.
Councilmember Robert White.
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. The record will note Councilmember McDuffie is here as well. We have three items for markup in the committee of the whole. The first is Bill 25-21, entitled Sam the Man Burns Way Designation Act of 2023. Bill 25-21 would symbolically designate 18th Street between M and N Streets Northwest as Sam the Man Burns Way. The location is in Ward 2. It's a symbolic naming. The symbolic naming is for ceremonial purposes, and it is in addition to and subordinate to any name that is an official name. Sam Burns was a native of the District of Columbia and graduated from the Theodore Roosevelt High School. Mr. Burns was recognized as an exceptional disc jockey and local music historian. He was known worldwide as the Man for his commitment to perfection and excellence in his craft, and was considered the Chuck Brown of dance music for his contributions to house music in the district. Mr. Burns was a skilled DJ with an impressive musical intuition and was not only an accomplished performer, but also a man of humility, generosity, and willingness to help the next generation of artists, dancers, producers, and DJs. Throughout his more than 40-year career, Sam Burns played dance music at iconic nightclubs, including the Clubhouse, Chapter 2, the Roxy, the Ritz, Trax, the Insect Club, Tiffany's, Kilimanjaro, Pollen, Red, the East Side, Dragonfly, Chicago's, State of the Union, U Street Music Hall, 18th Street Lounge, and other local venues. Sam Burns worked tirelessly to support his local community, including dispensing musical advice and life lessons to music lovers. He mentored younger DJs and helped in keeping the district's nightlife, dance culture, and house music community alive and thriving. Mr. Burns passed away in March of 2020 at the age of 62, leaving behind one son. This bill was first introduced by Councilmember Pinto and seven other council members on November 2nd last year. The Committee of the Whole held a hearing on this legislation on December 12th, 2022. The committee received no testimony or comments in opposition to the legislation. The bill was reintroduced on January 11th, 2023. Assuming that the committee votes affirmatively, symbolically designating this portion of 18th Street Northwest with the many establishments where Sam the Man Burns was well known for his contributions to nightlife, dance culture, and house music community, will honor his legacy in the community he called home. Thus, the Committee of the Whole recommends council approval of Bill 25-21, the Sam the Man Burns Way Designation Act of 2023. Without objection, I move both the print and report with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you so much. I just want to echo your remarks a bit and thank you for moving this bill today. Sam Burns was a proud native of Washington, D.C. and graduate of Theodore Roosevelt's High School. And as you noted, was a skilled DJ with an impressive musical intuition and was known worldwide as the man for his commitment to perfection and excellence in his music craft. He was recognized as one of the best DJs and music historians in the business. And throughout his career of over 40 years, Sam Burns played dance music at iconic nightclubs in DC, including the Clubhouse, the Roxy, U Street Music Hall, and 18th Street Lounge. And he was not only an accomplished performer, but also had a great deal of humility, generosity, and willingness to help the next generation of artists, dancers, producers, and DJs. Sam Burns worked tirelessly to support his local community, including dispensing musical advice and life lessons to music lovers, mentoring younger DJs, and helping keep the nightlife, dance culture, and house music of DC community alive and thriving. Sam Burns passed away on March 7th, 2020 at the age of 62, leaving behind his son, Mason. And this street dedication will honor his contributions to the district and his ongoing legacy in the community that he called home. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? The vote will be on both the print and report with leave for staff. All those in favor, Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen. Yes. Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Bonds is absent. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
The motion, the print and report are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the hearing record and reporter files.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The second bill for markup is Bill 25-24, entitled Micaiah Wilson Way Designation Act of 2023. Bill 25-24 would symbolically designate the 300 block of 53rd Street Northeast as Micaiah Wilson Way. The location is in Ward 7. A symbolic naming is for ceremonial purposes and is in addition to and subordinate to any name that is an official name. The purpose of this bill is to remember a murder victim in the district and to make one more statement of the need to end violence in our community. Micaiah Wilson was born May 31st, 2008 in Washington, D.C. She attended DC public schools and DC public charter schools where she engaged in activities such as basketball. On July 16th, 2018, 10-year-old Micaiah went to the pool with her older sister, and after returning home, she got a treat from an ice cream truck and sat on the stoop in front of her house with her sister. Neighbors were outside socializing and children were playing near their homes in the 300 block of 53rd Street between Cloud Place and Clay Street in the Clay Terrace neighborhood. A group of masked men in a black car drove up, jumped out, and fired a barrage of bullets into the crowded courtyard. Micaiah and 4 adults, including her older sister, were struck, but Micaiah was the only victim who did not survive the shooting. Her death sparked outrage in the community and intensified efforts at combating gun violence. In the aftermath of her death, the DC police launched an intense investigation to find and arrest the suspects responsible for the shooting. Eventually, 6 individuals were arrested and charged with Micaiah's murder. Micaiah's family and community members also spoke out about the need for more resources and support to help prevent such tragedies from happening again. Micaiah's family founded the now manages the Micaiah Lee Wilson Foundation, which is committed to raising funds and promoting initiatives to support families impacted by gun violence. This legislation was first introduced by Councilmember Gray and 7 other council members on October 27th, 2022. The Committee of the Whole held a hearing on the measure on December 12th, 2022. The committee has received no testimony or comments in opposition to the legislation. The bill was reintroduced on January 11th, 2023 by Councilmember Gray and 8 council members. Assuming this is approved by the council, by the committee, after, let me read this. Memorializing Micaiah Wilson on the street where she was murdered will highlight the importance of curbing gun violence in the community and the tragedy of gun violence. The Committee of the Whole recommends council approval of Bill 25-24, the Micaiah Wilson Way Designation Act of 23. Without objection, I'm going to move both the print and report with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was glad to introduce the Micaiah Wilson Way Designation Act of 2023 with my colleagues, Councilmembers Lewis, George, Fruman, Henderson, Bonds, Nadeau, Robert White, Pinto, and McDuffie. I reintroduced this bill after initially presenting it in Council Period 24, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank and acknowledge former Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner Yolanda Fields, Micaiah Wilson's family, and the community for their support. By symbolically designating Micaiah Wilson Way, this bill will honor Micaiah, who lost her life at the age of 10 years old as a victim of senseless violence, Mr. Chairman. By this symbolic designation will also serve as a lasting and timely statement against gun violence in celebration of life and in support of the community negatively impacted by acts of violence, Mr. Chairman. I ask my colleagues to vote in support of the legislation. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your support to make this happen. And we're glad to be able to do this. Such a senseless act of violence to snuff out the life of a 10-year-old who really hadn't even really begun life. So we hope to be able to make this a successful endeavor on her behalf. And I join my colleagues in moving the thing in this direction, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Gray. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Chairman.
Councilmember Treon White.
First, I want to thank you, Councilmember Gray, for this introduction. I am one who knows Micaiah's mother and father, and we know the deep impact that her loss had on the community was sparked a number of new initiatives in DC that people are currently involved in today. But as mentioned by the chairman, the family has requested more resources and support from the community for youth and young adults in the city who have long been neglected, especially Black and brown kids in our city. And I think that her foundation is an avenue where people like Micaiah should utilize those resources to go outside and play and enjoy fun and a safe environment here in the district. Well, it's simply not it. And so as we go into these summer months, I'm in deep prayer and thoughts about what we can do as a government to do our part to collaborate with community stakeholders, the police department, Department of Behavioral Health, our nonprofits, grandmothers, aunties, fathers, everybody to ensure that we don't have tragedies like this again. And it's happening far too much in a city that is the nation's capital of the world. And so I'm in support of this, Chairman and Councilmember Gray. And I look forward to when we put the sign up, but a sign is not good enough for a life that will never be here again. Again, I send my condolences to Makaya's mother, her father Mike, and the family, even her grandmother, and you know, just ask that we find in our hearts to have a passion for our kids to have safe spaces to go and play without being shot down in the streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? If there's no further discussion, the vote will be on, if there's no objection, the vote will be on both the print and report. With leave for staff, Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen. Yes. Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Bonds is absent. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
The print and report with leave for staff are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report is filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The third and final measure for markup in the committee of the whole this morning is proposed resolution or PR 25-135 entitled Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Aaron L. Myers II Confirmation Resolution of 2023. This legislation was introduced at the request of the Chair of the Commission on the Arts and Humanities on March 3rd. The purpose of the resolution is to confirm the appointment of Aaron Myers to serve the remainder of the unexpired four-year term to end on September 30th, 2024. Mr. Myers is a Ward 1 resident. He's an accomplished pianist and vocalist. He is an advocate for mental health and LGBTQ rights. As part of his advocacy, he chairs the board of directors of the Capitol Hill Jazz Foundation, sits as a member of the board of directors for CTE Vision Foundation and Covenant Full Potential Development Center. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he led the DMV Music Stakeholders Cohort as they shared resources, offered relief, and advocated for community needs to help strengthen and preserve the district's music ecosystem. He also has spent, I believe, roughly the past year as the executive director of Crittenden Services of Greater Washington. And he is the minister of music at Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ. The Commission on Arts and Humanities was established through the Commission on the Arts and Humanities Act that was adopted by the council in 1975. The commission is now an independent agency and is designated by the National Endowment of the Arts as the state arts agency for the District of Columbia. The executive director position is charged with the following duties: supervise the staff of the commission, assist the commission in executing its policies and duties, perform other duties as directed by the commission, and report regularly on the activities and operations of the agency to report on them to the members of the commission. At the hearing on his nomination, Mr. Myers discussed bringing an increased focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, innovation, and wellness to the commission. His goal is to bring stable, compassionate leadership and to be a bridge between working artists and the commission, and to restore trust with the community in the areas where that trust has eroded. Mr. Myers brings extensive and relevant experience, as well as a commitment to the arts and the district's artistic community. Assuming that this is approved by the council, by the committee is impressed with this candidate and recommends council approval, PR 25-135. To complete an unexpired term to end on September 30th, 2024. This legislation was introduced at the request of the commission on March 3rd, 2023. The committee of the whole held a public hearing on March 30th, 2023. Committees received at the hearing no testimony or comments in opposition, and since then has received no written comments or testimony. Well, I guess we wouldn't receive testimony, but since the hearing has received no written comments in opposition. Without objection, I'll move both the print and report with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilmember Nadeau.
thank you. I want to indicate my enthusiastic support for Aaron Myers' confirmation as the new director of the Commission on Arts and Humanities. I would be hard pressed to think of a more holistically qualified candidate for this job. Mr. Myers not only has the perspective of a practicing musician, he brings to this job experience in nonprofit management, work in supporting venues and art spaces, as well as a track record of effective advocacy as part of the DMV Music Stakeholders Coalition. My office and I have worked with him closely in the past, and I can attest to the fact that he knows how to work collaboratively with council to advance the best interests of artists, organizations, and venues alike. Thank you. I look forward to voting yes on this measure and strongly encourage my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to speak in support of Aaron Myers as the permanent director of the Commission on Arts. I've worked with Mr. Myers on a number of issues that he brought to the council that ended up becoming legislation that gave more opportunities for local artists to perform, to get paid for their music. I've seen him be a convener of people from different sides of issues, works empathetically to understand issues, to move issues forward, and to never get stuck on one opinion. Bringing also with that years of experience as a working, performing artist and as a director of nonprofits and in our faith community. I think the breadth of experience Mr. Myers brings will be incredibly useful to the commission as it continues to chart an important path. So I look forward to voting in favor of this nomination. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilmember Fruman.
and I would like to speak very briefly, also very enthusiastically in favor of this nomination. Aaron Myers is a riveting performer and a very effective advocate, and I think he'll do a wonderful job on this important commission. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion? The vote will be on both. The vote will be on both the print and report with leave for staff. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yep.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. Both the resolution and, the print report are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the hearing record and report are filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. There are no further measures for markup in the committee of the whole. We have no measures reported out of other committees, so we have no other business. We will take about 6 minutes because the Assistant Secretary likes to put me on a timer. And then we will start the legislative meeting. Time is 12:28 and the meeting is adjourned. I'm calling to order this meeting of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council. Today is Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. The time is 12:35 in the afternoon. And this meeting is our regular monthly meeting for the month of May, and it is the sixth legislative meeting of Council Period 25, and it is being held in room 500, the council chambers of the Johnny Wilson Building. Although there are several members who are participating virtually, because this meeting is accessible via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform. It is being broadcast live on Council Channel 13, and it is available on the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov. We always begin our legislative meetings with a moment of silence, and I would ask that members in the chamber and those participating at home or wherever that we observe a moment of silence. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Allen,
Here.
Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Freeman,
Present.
Councilmember Gray,
Here.
Councilmember Henderson,
Here.
Councilmember Louis George,
Here.
Councilmember McDuffie,
Here.
Chairman Mendelson,
Present.
Councilmember Nadell,
Here.
Councilmember Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Pinto,
Present.
Councilmember Robert White,
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We have the Secretary's report of committee filings. I'm going to recognize the Chair Pro Tem, Mr. McDuffie, with regard to the Secretary's report of committee filings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move to waive the reading of the Secretary's report.
It's been a motion to waive the reading of the report. Is there discussion on the motion? By voice vote, all those in favor of the motion to waive the reading, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Don't see or hear any no votes. The motion's approved. We have the Secretary's report of introductions and referrals. I'll again recognize the Chair Pro Tem, Mr. McDuffie.
And again, I'll move to waive the reading of the Secretary's report of introductions.
Is there a motion to waive the reading? Is there discussion? On the motion to waive the reading, all those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Don't see or hear any no votes. The motion carries unanimously. We have the consent agenda. Are there any changes to the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes, item 4 on the consent agenda, which is a contract that Councilmember Gray and I introduced on behalf of the executive. We'd like to move that to non-consent, please.
That's on page 5, PR 25-215 and Bill 25-271. Correct?
If that is the contract between the hospital corporation and Maximum Healthcare.
Yes, I believe it is.
Yes, that is the correct one.
Okay, so that's removed. Further changes to the consent agenda? I have 2. Removing from the consent agenda on page 2, item B6, Howard East Towers Alley Closing and Street Dedication Act, Bill 25-146. And on page 8, no, page 7, item 14, it's a contract with VTech Solutions. PR 25-205 and Bill 25-262. So that's removed. Anything further with regard to the consent agenda? All right, we have the consent agenda before us as modified. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie,
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson,
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau,
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker,
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto,
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White,
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White,
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds,
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes, and Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The consent agenda is approved unanimously. Bill 25-146, Howard East Towers Alley Closing and Street Dedication Act of 2023. Without objection, this will be postponed to May 16th legislative meeting, additional legislative meeting. Hearing no objection, the measure is postponed to May 16th. The next measure is on page 5. PR 25-215, contract number NFPHC-NSD-21-C-00027, modifications 10 and 11 between the not-for-profit hospital corporation and Maxim Healthcare Staffing Services, Inc. Approval and payment authorization, emergency declaration resolution 2023. Councilmember Henderson?
I think Councilmember Gray is. Oh, okay. I'll do it. Like to withdraw this measure.
The measure is withdrawn. The next item is on page 7. Item 14, contract number CW 105548 with VTech Solutions, Inc. Approval and payment authorization, emergency declaration resolution of 2023. PR 25-205. I placed it on the agenda. I am withdrawing it. Which gets us to the non-consent agenda. If there's no objection, we will skip items 1 and 2 for a moment and go to Bill item 3, which is on page 8. Bill 25-198. Migrant Services Eligibility Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Robert White or Councilmember Lewis George?
Thank you, Chairman. I've asked to have B 25-198 removed from the consent agenda for the purpose of making a brief clarifying amendment, which was circulated to all members yesterday. As we know, the council supported the mayor last year in passing emergency and temporary legislation to create a new and separate support system for recent migrants to the District of Columbia, and the Office of Migrant Services has been set up to provide basic supports and interim housing for migrants. One of the challenges that arose after the legislation passed last year was that it had the potential to define longtime district residents as migrants if they subsequently became involved in the immigration system. Our recent emergency bill sought to address that by maintaining district residents' status as residents if they had documentation proving their residency dated before April 1, 2022. Since we passed the language that required some more clarification, our amendment makes clear that a resident instead needs to have documentation that demonstrates their residency before April 1st, 2022, a small but important distinction from what we passed a few weeks ago, which will avoid challenges arising simply from disparate dates on documents. I will move that amendment shortly, but before I do, I want to speak to a broader problem that has arisen in our migrant services system over the last several days. The Department of Human Services announced last week that our hotels dedicated to migrants are now full, and that space in Montgomery County is full as well. As a result, new migrants coming into the district now have no options other than living on the street or receiving a ticket to somewhere else. Advocates are calling on the mayor to utilize our contingency reserves to address this problem and to avoid the prospect of children and families living in encampments or on the street. I agree with that advocacy. I also recognize that our current system is not functioning. Migrants coming into the city placed in hotels are staying in those hotels for extended periods of time, leaving no space for new migrants due to a lack of turnover. That appears to be caused by a few different things. One is that restrictions on residents at the hotels may be impacting their ability to effectively seek and maintain employment and housing. Second, the support services being offered may not be sufficiently targeted toward assisting residents with finding a path to stable, permanent housing and employment in the district or elsewhere. These issues will likely continue to get worse as federal policy evolves and as a greater share of migrants may be coming to the district or be sent to the district knowing that we have a better support network in place than many other jurisdictions. And there are real tensions we have to acknowledge between welcoming new district residents and transiting migrants and meeting the needs of longer-term district residents experiencing homelessness at the same time, all within a proposed budget with steep human services cuts. 30 seconds, Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you. These are not easy problems to solve, but if we want to avoid the specter of increasing numbers of families and children sleeping on our streets, these are problems we have to solve together. I'm committed to working with the administration and stakeholders to identify solutions that meet our district values. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I move amendment number 1 to B25-198, the Migrant Services Clarification Temporary Amendment Act of 2023.
Thank you, Councilmember White. So we have the amendment before us. Is there discussion on the amendment?
Councilmember Bonds wishes to be recognized, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for noting that. Councilmember Bonds?
Yes, thank you very much. And I just wanted to ask of Councilmember White if he has any information, data that would be an indication that migrants have applied for work. That's an arena I'm very concerned about and want to get as many DC residents employed as possible. So I wondered if he has some real information that would inform us that migrants are not being given an opportunity for employment.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Bonds. The short answer is I don't have that information. The slightly longer answer is that it depends on where folks are in the immigration process. Federal law prohibits some immigrants from working. That is a big issue that impacts the district that the council doesn't control.
I appreciate that comment. I was asking because you made a point of in your conversation about the need for, I'm sorry, I'm hearing the background noise. Forgive me. Oh, God. You made a point of indicating that there was some issue about employment. So I just want to understand what that might be. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councilmember White.
Further discussion? This is on the amendment.
Councilmember Louis George wishes to be recognized.
Thank you. Councilmember Louis George.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councilmember White just noted, we have a new housing crisis brewing as migrant families are being turned away from a hotel shelter. The immediate consequence here is that families, many with very young children, are going to be sleeping on our streets. Buses have not and will not stop arriving in the district, and we still have an obligation to offer sanctuary and stability to these newcomers. This is exactly what the Migrant Services Temporary Act allows the city to do, to use its discretion to provide welcome services and temporary shelter for migrants and migrant families who arrive in our city. We need the mayor and DHS to act with urgency to expand Office of Migrant Services operations to meet this increased demand for short-term hotel accommodations while families get on their feet. I also want to note that the temporary bill before us authorizes the mayor to help migrants with resettlement services, including resettling in DC. For many, that means assistance with new documentation, IDs, school enrollment, and healthcare. With these basic needs met, many migrants would be in a much better position to move out of hotels and secure their own housing. We need DHS and case managers to urgently prioritize ID assistance and to take time to help migrants who intend to stay in the district with the process of finding and moving into their own apartments or other housing. Similarly, getting kids enrolled in school quickly will help parents have time to work on their immigration cases, enroll in English classes, and begin the process of looking for what work if that is permitted in their specific situation. I think this is a difficult situation for everyone, of course, but OMES needs to do more to help migrants land on their feet and not make it harder for anyone to support themselves and their family. We have authorized a lot of flexibility for OMS to be innovative in how it serves migrants arriving in DC. We haven't authorized is a limit on our support, especially so long as the federal government is still reimbursing many of these expenses. We cannot allow families to be turned out to the streets and exacerbate the homelessness crisis our city also faces. And so I think this is a moment where we need to have the administration step up and increase our capacity to accommodate newly arriving migrant families and help them permanently resettle. So thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Councilmember. The discussions on the amendment, is there any further discussion?
Councilmember Pinto wishes to be recognized.
Councilmember Pinto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to thank you, Councilmember White, for moving this forward. This, as you may recall, is an issue that I was very concerned about last summer and fall, particularly around ensuring that we are not inadvertently excluding any of our DC residents right now from receiving the services that they need, and appreciate this bill. I'm looking forward to supporting it today. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, the votes on the amendment that Councilmember Robert White circulated and is linked on the agenda by a voice vote. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I don't hear or see any no votes. The amendment is approved unanimously. We have the bill as amended. Is there discussion? Roll call vote on the bill as amended, Bill 25-198. Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Gray votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill as amended is approved unanimously. We will go back to item 1 in this section of the agenda, which is Bill 25-164, Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Temporary Amendment Act of 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given that the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act of 2022 completed the required 60-day congressional review period last week, according to the count by our general counsel, but understanding that there may still be a couple of days left on the congressional count from their perspective, I want to move to postpone this measure to our June legislative meeting.
to the June 6th meeting.
Well, maybe I should check with the general counsel. Would you like the May 16th or would
May
you prefer
16th. This
June?
works, May 16th.
Then let's do May 16th would be my motion.
All right, if there's no objection, the measure will be postponed to May 16th. I hear no objection. The measure is postponed to May 16th. Item 2 at the top of page 8, motor vehicle and homeowner insurance prior approval rate filing temporary amendment act of 2023, bill 25-148. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On March 7th, 2023, the council approved PR 25-121, the motor vehicle and homeowner insurance prior approval rate filing amendment emergency declaration resolution of 2023, and bill 25-147, the motor vehicle and homeowner insurance prior approval rate filing emergency amendment act of 2023. The emergency measure changed the rate filing standard for motor vehicle and homeowner insurance rate filings from file and use to prior approval, so that the Department of Insurance, Securities and Banking would have time to review filings and ensure that rate increases are neither excessive nor discriminatory before the new rates become effective. The department, in coordination with various stakeholders, requested an amendment to the temporary bill that I would like to move now. Let me move the underline, Mr. Chairman, but I'd like to also move an amendment that was circulated previously.
I might have missed the question. The bill's before us. You have an amendment linked. Are you
Yes.
moving the amendment?
Yes.
We have the amendment before us.
Can I speak to it?
Only if you moved it.
I did. I think I did.
Then just now, then you get to speak to it.
Okay. The department, in coordination with various stakeholders, requested an amendment to the temporary bill, which will better clarify the impacted lines of insurance, also require insurers to provide renewal notices, and require that insurers provide renewal notices no less than 45 days prior to policy renewal. The 45-day notice brings the legislation in line with the advance notice requirements of other states. And I urge my colleagues to support the bill as amended.
Mr. McDuffie had another 2 minutes to speak to the amendment. We have the amendment before us. Is there discussion on the amendment? By a voice vote on the amendment, all those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed to the amendment? I don't see or hear any no votes. The amendment is approved unanimously. We have the bill as amended. Is there further discussion? Madam Secretary, will you call the roll? The vote is on Bill 25-148 as amended.
Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Sorry, there's a delay in the transmission. Thank you. Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill as amended is approved unanimously. If there's no objection, we'll skip number 1 under emergency. We'll come back to it. So we'll go to item 2, which is District of Columbia Housing Authority Procurement Regulations Emergency Declaration Resolution 2023, PR 25-197. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. From a technical standpoint, the legislation before us is pretty short and simple, but it reflects an important ongoing legal debate As we all know, the DC Housing Authority is responsible for administering our public housing program. DCHA also plays a major role in administering housing vouchers. Their second annual operating budget includes hundreds of millions of dollars of both local and federal funds. And of course, they frequently need to enter into contracts for goods and services. In the Home Rule Act, Congress requires that anytime a DC agency enters into a contract that's worth over $1 million or that lasts more than 1 year, the agency has to send the contract to the council for approval. It's codified in our local law as DC Code Section 1-204-.51 and has been reaffirmed by the Office of the Attorney General multiple times. In recent months, DCHA's Executive Leadership and Stabilization and Reform Board have devoted a huge share of their time and attention to addressing various deficiencies that the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development laid out in an assessment report last fall. Part of what they have to do is prepare updated procurement policies. Back in 1999, when the Housing Authority was getting ready to exit federal receivership, the council mandated that DCHA send us procurement regulations for approval by November 5th, 2000. Now that the feds are involved again and DCHA is following that DCHA is following that long-standing legal mandate. In March, the STAR board voted to send us procurement regulations for approval. The regs are 22 years late, but better late than never. The current executive director and board weren't in charge for most of those years, and I appreciate them acting swiftly on HUD's directive. Now, the problem is that the proposed regulations contain what we believe are an inaccurate interpretation of the Home Rule Act. If you look at proposed policy for 14 DCMR 7200.1, it claims that the council decided that DC Code 1-204.61 and 2-352.02 don't apply to DCHA's federal procurements. It's supposed to say 1-204.51, but either way, the claim is inaccurate and not possible. Since the question of whether DCHA's federally funded contracts are subject to council review is a big deal, the Office of the General Counsel has advised us to take emergency action and strike this statement from the proposed regulations. And the reason we're doing this on emergency is that initially we believed we had until June 1st to act on the regulation approval, the resolution that's already pending, but we've been advised that the deadline may actually be much sooner. My committee team and I are going to keep talking with DCHA, OGC, and the Office of the Budget Director to make sure everybody's doing what they need to under federal law. For now, I move the District of Columbia Housing Authority Procurement Regulations Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Pinto.
Thanks so much. And thank you, Councilmember White. I just received this letter that we all got from the mayor about her concerns with this bill. I just wanted to see if you could respond to that briefly, Councilmember White.
Yes, this would put the Housing Authority in the same status as every other local and independent agency. I think the fact that we are a couple of decades late on doing this doesn't make it any less important. I also want to clarify that the Office of the Attorney General has twice over the years reaffirmed that even independent agencies have to follow the provision of the Home Rule Act that requires large contracts to come before the council for approval. I would note that the council cannot, even if it wanted to in the past, waive provisions of the Home Rule Act. And finally, given where the Housing Authority is, it is particularly important that the council maintain its review authority.
Okay, thanks so much. And is this just for contracts that are over $1 million?
That's correct.
Got it. Okay, thanks so much.
Give me just a moment.
I'm sorry, and multi-year contracts as well, Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you. Is there further discussion on the declaration? We have the declaration before us, PR 25-197. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember McDuffie?
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson?
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau?
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker?
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto?
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White?
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White?
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds?
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray?
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill or resolution PR 25-198. Councilmember White,
So moved.
is there discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, I think we can do a voice vote on this. Again, the vote will be on PR 25-198. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see you here. Any no votes? Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The resolution is approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-199, District of Columbia Housing Authority Procurement Clarification Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From a technical, nope. Stay 1 moment, please. Mr. Chairman, thank you. This makes clarifying corrections to the bill as recommended from the OGC with regard to the legislation we just voted on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Is there discussion on this? The vote will be on the declaration, PR 25-199. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson?
I'm sorry, were you calling me?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Mendelson?
Oh, my. Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau?
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker?
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto?
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White?
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White?
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds? Councilmember Bonds? Councilmember Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray?
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie?
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Councilmember Bonds?
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. The underlying bill is Bill 25-252, District of Columbia Housing Authority Procurement Clarification Emergency Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Robert White.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion. Since the declaration was approved unanimously, I think we can have a voice vote On Bill 25-252, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-194, just targeted historic preservation assistance emergency declaration resolution of 2023. This declaration would enable measures to temporarily expand eligibility for the Historic Homeowner Grant Program, which is administered by the Office of Planning, to expand that eligibility to multifamily building to a multifamily building in the Meridian Hill Historic District and the Mount Pleasant Historic District. The council previously adopted identical legislation by emergency and temporary act in 2021 and 2022. So this is not new. This continues that previous expansion. A third round of emergency and temporary legislation is necessary to complete a multifamily building grant application. The impetus for this legislation was repairs that needed to be made to a multifamily condominium and cooperative building in the Meridian Hill and Mount Pleasant Historic Districts. The building's known as the Kennesaw. Given the complicated governance structure of the building, part condominium, part cooperative, with some units at market and some, I believe, are below market. And given the large number of units, determining eligibility for the grant awards has been complicated. The Office of Planning is asking for another round of legislation in order to complete this grant. I will say to members that we expect that we will, as a result of the experience with this building, develop a permanent legislation, which is why we're continuing to do rounds of emergency and temporary. I move the emergency PR 25-194. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman. This emergency measure, as you mentioned, extends authority given to the Historic Preservation Office to issue grants to homeowners in a multifamily property in Mount Pleasant that is in need of assistance. Typically, the Historic Homeowner Grant Program is only issued to single-family residents, but the Kennesaw building is one of the first hard-won TOPA successes and remains a novel mixed-use cooperative and condo building that has stood the test of time. There are a number of repairs to the building being required by historic preservation, and low-income co-op and condo residents are at risk of having their housing costs go up to unsustainable levels due to those repairs. This measure would give HPO and the building more time to work out the grants and timeline of the repairs, as the application and approval process is taking longer than expected. OP has indicated that funds are sufficient in the grant program. As we discussed with Director Cozart at the Office of Planning's oversight hearings, this effort has raised some important questions of how we support multifamily properties with what is often the very expensive task of maintaining a building to historic standards. The Preservation Assistance Program is currently constructed is clearly meant for single-family homeowners. The process of trying to graft that application and grant-making process onto each individual unit owner in a large building has proven extremely challenging. It looks like we're close to reaching a conclusion on this property, and I believe we can move forward with some lessons learned for a longer-term solution that applies district-wide. Thank you, Chairman, for continuing to show support for the Kennesaw, and I encourage my colleagues to continue their support as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Further discussion on.
Councilmember Bonds wishes to be recognized.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. And thank you very much for moving this important piece of legislation. I think it will help a number of buildings across the city, particularly in the older parts of the district, Ward 1, a little bit in Ward 4 and Ward 3, that fall into this category of being multi-unit buildings as opposed to just being a single household. So thank you very much for this, and I'm looking forward to supporting or looking at your permanent bill that you indicated you're interested in getting done.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? The vote will be on PR 25-194, the declaration. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Nadeau,
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker,
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto,
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White,
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White,
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds,
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fuman,
Yes.
Councilmember Fuman votes yes. Councilmember Gray, Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. There's a problem with the feed. Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie,
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson,
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-248. So moved. I have an oral amendment. The bill has a applicability date. And I believe the applicability date in the bill is April 21st, 2023. General Counsel's advised that we should make this applicable as of the date of the first emergency. And that first emergency was August 5th, 2021. Do I have that right, General Counsel?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so if there's no objection, we have this oral amendment to the bill that the applicability date is August 5th, 2021. There's no objection. That oral amendment will be accepted. Hearing no objection, it's accepted. We have the bill as amended before us. Further discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we'll do a voice vote on the bill. As amended, Bill 25-248, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill as amended is approved unanimously. The next measure is Marionberry Avenue Designation Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023, PR 25-195. The purpose of the designation is to officially designate Good Hope Road Southeast between Anacostia Drive Southeast and Alabama Avenue Southeast as Marionberry Avenue Southeast. And also to symbolically designate Marionberry Avenue Southeast between the intersection of Naylor Road and 25th Street and Alabama Avenue as Good Hope Way. So that would be a symbolic designation. And to require the district to reissue certain documents to individuals and entities with new addresses on Marionberry Avenue Southeast. The designations are effective as of July 1st, 2023. Permanent legislation implementing official designation as well as the symbolic designation was adopted on final reading on April 4th, 2023. Enacting the legislation on an emergency basis, which is what I'm proposing now, will allow the district to begin implementing provisions of the law with respect to replacement documents in anticipation of July 1st, 2023. So let me sort of restate all that. Usually when we do these designations, namings, they're effective whatever date passes congressional review. Here, because it's official and because it entails numerous individuals and businesses who will have to get reissued driver's licenses and other documents, we have a specific applicability date, which is July 1st, 2023. The legislation takes all of Good Hope Road, renames it as Marionberry Avenue. But at the top of the hill, because there is a history of that neighborhood being known as Good Hope because of a tavern that was there in the 19th century named Good Hope Tavern, we keep that as a symbolic designation. There was a question asked of me earlier that I'm going to be mean and nasty and instead ask the question instead of answering it. Councilmember Henderson, do you know about implementation?
Yes, well, so for the benefit of the public who might not have been listening into the breakfast, my question, given that there are over 2,000 addresses along this proposed designation, my question was, which agency is responsible for providing notice to either the business owners or the residents or the occupants of said addresses that the official address is going to change in July?
And I know you called the Director of Department of Transportation, so the answer is?
So he said the only thing he's hearing really quickly is that the DC Register. Now, we read the DC Register, but clearly I can't imagine that everyone enjoys a good weekend read of the Register each week. And so I know we didn't discuss this, but I am wondering if you might entertain a verbal amendment to just name an agency as the person who needs to do this. Because I fear that there's going to be a lot of finger pointing, oh, DDOT, oh, Department of Buildings, oh, Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs. Like, we just need to pick one. What I don't want to happen is that these folks say we didn't know. So somebody just needs to send a letter to these addresses as notification. That's all I'm saying.
Point of clarity, Chairman.
Councilmember Tran White?
Yeah, I do remember that the DMV is supposed to send a notice to those, I think it was 1,600 individuals who had a license or ID. But again, that may or may not cover everybody, and things change so much, it doesn't include the businesses. And I don't know if one agency can do that. So maybe we need some clarity from the mayor's office or deputy mayor to push it down.
Yes. So I guess the question is, like, someone needs to be the responsible party who has the addresses to send a notice. So maybe the amendment is the mayor
I have language.
or their, oh, great, wonderful, look at that. And designee shall move.
The deputy mayor for operations and infrastructure, comma, or other official designated or other official or agency designated by the mayor shall timely notify residents and businesses of the name change and any need to apply for reissued documents. And I can repeat that in a second.
Should we say written notice?
No, because it could be electronic. Could be door hangers. We'll leave that to, I think given the nature of this, I think we.
Okay. I just
So-
don't want them to send a robocall, Mr. Chairman, and claim that as notice.
The deputy mayor for operations and infrastructure, comma, or other official or agency designated by the mayor, comma, shall timely notify residents and businesses of the name change and any need to apply for reissued documents. Madam General Counsel.
Can you repeat that?
Yes.
Slowly after notify residents and
The deputy mayor for operations and infrastructure, comma, or other official or agency designated by the mayor, comma, shall timely notify residents and businesses
Yep.
of the name change and any need to apply for reissued documents.
thank you.
The intent here is that we do name someone, the deputy mayor for operations and infrastructure, but give flexibility to the mayor to pick someone else, be responsible. And there's no reason why it couldn't be more than one agency if that's the mayor's decision. We say timely notify. We do leave discretion how that notification will be, but we make clear the purpose is to give these individuals and businesses the ability to apply for reissued documents if they're needed.
That sounds great.
If there's no objection, that amendment will be accepted. Hearing no objection. My note, though, is that we're still on the declaration. So actually, that amendment can't be accepted yet.
Okay, we'll hold that until we pass the declaration.
Correct.
Great.
But thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Further discussion on the declaration? Roll call vote on the declaration, PR 25-195. Madam Secretary?
Councilmember Parker,
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto,
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White,
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White,
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds,
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman,
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
thank you. Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie,
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson,
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes, and Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, so moved. And without objection, I will move the oral amendment, which I will repeat: the deputy mayor for operations and infrastructure or other official or agency designated by the mayor shall timely notify residents and businesses of the name change and any need to apply for reissued documents. Madam General Counsel, do you have that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
If there's no objection, that's accepted. We have the bill as amended before us. Further discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, I'll do a voice vote on the bill. All those in favor of Bill 25-250 as amended, say aye.
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 Opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. The next item is PR 25-196. Reverend Lloyd Young Court Designation Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. The purpose of the designation is to officially designate the public alley within Square 4546 as Reverend Lloyd Young Court Northeast. This alley is bounded by 17th and 18th Streets and D and E Streets in Northeast. I believe it's the Rosedale neighborhood. Permanent legislation implementing this official designation was adopted on first reading on April 4th, and it was approved earlier in this meeting on final reading. Enacting the legislation on an emergency basis will allow permitting for a by right development on a lot internal to the square, while the permanent legislation is pending congressional review. I move the declaration. Is there discussion? Vote will be on PR 25-196. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Pinto,
I'm sorry, Nyasha. Where are we on the agenda?
Reverend Lloyd Young Court, the declaration resolution.
Page 9, item
Yes.
6.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Parker votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-251. So moved. Is there discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, I'll ask for a voice vote on Bill 25-251. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. The next item is PR 25-200, Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Technical Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On December 20th, 2022, the council passed the Comprehensive Police and Justice Reform Amendment Act of 2022, a package of reforms that promote transparency and accountability for law enforcement officers in the district. That permanent law builds on reforms initially passed during the summer of 2020 that had been maintained with successive emergency and temporary measures, including most recently, the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Emergency Act of 2023, which was passed on March 7th and is set to expire on June 22nd. The permanent law has completed its congressional review period on April 21st, 2023, and so most of the law has taken effect, superseding conflicting portions of the Emergency Act currently in effect. However, 2 sections of the permanent law are subject to a delayed applicability provision and will therefore not go into effect until October 1, 2023. Therefore, this latest round of emergency and temporary legislation is needed to prevent the gap in the law between the expiration of the Emergency Act and the delayed applicability date of the 2 sections in the permanent bill. The bill also clarifies the scope of certain mandatory reporting requirements that were amended in the Expanding Supports for Crime Victims Amendment Act of 2022 to ensure that they only apply to minor victims and don't inadvertently cover crimes committed against adults. With that, I move the declaration.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there discussion on the declaration? The vote will be on PR 25-200. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-254. Councilmember Allen.
Yes. So moved, Mr. Chair. I was so excited to vote for it.
All right, we have the bills on the floor. Is there discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we can have a voice vote on this. This is on Bill 25-254. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Are there any opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. We're going to go back to the first emergency on page 8. That's food delivery fees transparency emergency declaration resolution of 2023 PR 25-172. Just to remind members and for the record, this measure came before us at our May meeting. There was a motion at that time to postpone to today's meeting, which is why it's on the agenda. The notice was circulated for the May meeting. And with that, let me recognize Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me also thank the patience of my colleagues to be able to return back to this. As they say, sometimes nothing focuses like a deadline. So I appreciate it, but I hope that it's a harbinger of ending in a very good spot. We are returning to a debate that we tabled last month to put in place stronger protections and guidelines for our local restaurants who do business on apps like Grubhub, Uber Eats, and DoorDash. Just to reorient briefly, the pandemic has dramatically changed the food delivery marketplace, and with it, a handful of companies largely cornered that third-party application space. In short, it's now almost impossible to be a restaurant and not be on the apps. Very few restaurants are packed on weeknights, and delivery can range from 10% or even 90% of your business. During the pandemic, the council created a 15% cap on fees, but as the pandemic measures ended, we've seen third-party apps move to increase fees, and what we heard from many small businesses and restaurants are that without further protections, they would be forced to pay higher fees or see themselves reduced and removed from consumers just looking to buy a meal. That plays out by suppressing restaurants who pay a lesser fee in searches, shrinking the delivery radius around restaurants and more. They know they've got the upper hand. Small restaurants have few choices, and the third-party app, not the driver bringing that meal to your doorstep or the staff cooking in the kitchen, are the ones making record revenues while everyone else is struggling. So I introduced this emergency bill last month, and after debate, it was postponed 1 month to continue working on some consensus. And what we have before us reflects the hard work to get to that point. I'm grateful to the Restaurant Association for sitting down with me in a very collaborative way to make this a stronger bill and for their support of this legislation. I also appreciate my colleagues' input in these revisions. And as I'll move in just a moment when we get to the underlying act, Councilmember McDuffie for working with us on some compromise language that I'll move in an oral amendment again when we get to the underlying act. Today, we'll be helping our restaurants stay on a fair footing in the marketplace without being forced to pay higher and higher fees that matter less to Taco Bell than District Taco. The restaurant business is famously one of thin margins. As soon as fees tick up, the restaurant's cooking food just to break even. And I said this last month, but I want to reemphasize today, the fees that a third-party app charges for that meal come into your home, they aren't special fees tacked onto the final bill. It's a cut from the cost of making the meal. It's buying the ingredients, running the kitchen, paying the chef and staff salaries. It also means everything costs more money on the consumer side, so pricing out residents who can't afford the extra charge. But that cost doesn't go to the kitchen staff or the restaurant's bottom line. It doesn't go to the drivers. We've heard from research and from lived experience that drivers in this economy lack power, protections, and are often scrambling to make back-to-back runs when these apps can hide drivers and meals from view. It's the drivers that struggle waiting for the chance to make that run. For them, time is literally money. But it's not uncommon for some drivers to wait up to an hour for a chance to hustle and make that delivery. Those fees we're talking about are cutting into the drivers and restaurants. Instead, they go to the people who own the algorithm. So the underlying emergency ensures restaurants remain visible on the platforms by ensuring customers can see restaurants within a 4-mile radius of the restaurant. Additionally, we're ensuring that restaurants, drivers, and customers' interests, Mr. Chairman, if I can have 1 more minute,
Without objection.
are met in 3 other ways under the amendment in the nature of a substitute that I'm moving. First, it would prohibit the third-party delivery services from hiding restaurants from drivers by reducing the delivery radius around a restaurant below 4 miles. This is good for drivers because they'll be able to see more restaurants and deliver food faster to customers. Big tech companies behind these apps try to constrain the supply of drivers available, and this prevents that. It doesn't mean the drivers have to take those deliveries in the radius, but it means they have more choice, and the apps won't be able to force restaurants to pay higher commission fees to get the shorter delivery times. And second, it requires the apps to disclose the services included in their commission fee package. Right now, some apps just say your delivery radius will decrease if you choose a lower commission tier. But what does that actually mean? This provision makes sure the restaurants are actually getting a clearly communicated plan to them. And third, it makes a technical clarification that an internet search engine is not a third-party meal delivery service for the purposes of the law that we're talking about. So with these changes, the Restaurant Association has said they are now enthusiastically in support. And as I mentioned earlier, when we get to the underlying Emergency Act, I'm going to be I will first move the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and then I'll be moving an amendment that I worked out with Councilor McDuffie. I appreciate everyone's efforts to get to this place of support today. Our restaurants and our drivers need the help. They don't have a lot of wiggle room, nor do they have a lot of time. The less our restaurants, the more that's being taken in these apps and fees, the less our restaurants and their workers make, the drivers make less, and the more DC consumers pay. As often the case with emergency legislation, this is a common sense step that we can take right now. And I know and I look forward to partnering with Councilor McDuffie on larger permanent bill to address this and many other urgent concerns that he is working on. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I'm going to move the declaration.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. We have the declaration before us. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just offer some brief remarks for the benefit of my colleagues and the public and folks who've really followed this debate closely. I want to thank Councilmember Allen and his team. They've worked really hard on this measure and as he stated, have included some specific changes that we asked that he include in this amendment in nature substitute in order to address what we think are some challenges that are impacting our restaurant industry, its workers, and everybody who cares about supporting an industry that has supported the District of Columbia for decades and been vital to the revitalization of our city over the last decades. I also want to acknowledge that in making these changes, I do plan to vote in favor of this emergency measures today. Also acknowledging the hard work that's been done on by my staff and working with other members of the council, including stakeholders outside of the council on a permanent bill that we introduced yesterday that we look forward to having a hearing on in May that we hope will encompass some of the things that are being done in this emergency today, but also addressing a number of important needs that have been expressed by the restaurants, the customers that they serve, the workers who are delivering food on the delivery apps, and frankly, so many people who are impacted by this important industry in the District of Columbia. We have to acknowledge that the way we thought about restaurants, our experience with restaurants pre-pandemic is really vastly different today than it was a few years ago before we were impacted by the pandemic. And we're trying to adapt to be able to address those concerns that are being raised by the industry. And sometimes this is what it takes, is a little bit of back and forth. Ultimately, though, I think what we've tried to do here and what I support today is in the best interest of the restaurant industry, consumers, and all the patrons who've supported the industry over the years. So look forward to supporting this and also working on the permanent bill.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Councilmember Allen for bringing forward this bill that can bring some very immediate relief for restaurants that are operating around the city. I've heard from many restaurants on this issue, and I'm really glad to see that we're going to get to some prompt relief. I also really want to thank Councilmember McDuffie for all the work that he's done on this, not just this year, but in previous years in setting the table for this, and the work that he's going to do on the permanent legislation. This is tricky territory, and I don't want to hold myself out as being an expert. I'm delighted that we're going to get to immediate relief and then the kind of fuller deliberative process to think about the comprehensive relief in the months to come. So thank you to you both.
Thank you. Further discussion, we have the declaration.
Yes.
Councilmember Tran White.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Allen, for your thoughts and your adjustments that's more amenable to the drivers who are everyday working class people trying to feed their families. I did want to, I see that you changed the language to speak to within a 4-mile radius for delivery services, but I do note that DoorDash has some issues with the legislation. And I asked them to send me what those issues are, and they sent me a flyer with DC on there. It doesn't necessarily speak to this legislation, but I guess it has some bullet points. About 75% of restaurants agree DoorDash enables them to reach their customers. 69% of restaurants believe that they acquire new dining customers who were first introduced to the operation by DoorDash, just trying to bring their credibility, I guess, to the industry to ensure that their drivers are included in this legislation. I think you spoke to part of it during the breakfast, but what was changed that spoke to the drivers in this legislation? And have you addressed any issues that DoorDash and other the driver services had?
Sure. I appreciate that. And I want to note too, I appreciate your comments during our conversation last month as well about this. So one of the things, and once we get to the Emergency Act, we will, I'll move the oral amendment that might address one of the questions you have, which is related to the radius. And so while we have different radius that are set by different apps, in the oral amendment, I'll be recommending that we adjust it from the 5 that was proposed in the original ANS to 4, and that'll be consistent. And that also will be consistent with the permanent legislation that has been introduced. That'll be part of that conversation. I think that it perhaps addresses one of those concerns, but from the driver's perspective, also making sure that, again, the meals and the opportunity to get that meal to be delivered, that's not going to be shielded from that driver is important. And that's part of what some of these protections are. My understanding is that as we have the debate on the more comprehensive legislation, there will also be additional type of driver protections that might be more suitable for a permanent piece of legislation that we're able to work on as well.
Chairman, anything is specific related to DoorDash that you know of?
I don't want to single out one particular third-party app, so I don't think I could say that there's something in here that is specific to address DoorDash. Our goal was to focus on the restaurants and the drivers and what their concerns are, but taking into account considerations that we've heard from the different apps.
I got that. I guess when they called my office, I wasn't there. They spoke to my legislative director, and I asked them to. I didn't speak to them personally, but I didn't know if they reached out to you with any concerns related to this legislation. And so when I asked about anything particular from their concerns, I'm not talking about creating legislation particularly for that company, but addressing any of their concerns that they had. That's pretty much my question, not more so the legislation, particularly for them. You get what I'm saying?
I think so.
Have you spoke to them?
Yes, and my staff has met with them multiple times.
Okay.
And I could certainly follow up afterwards too. If there's something more specific, I can try to make sure I get for you on that. But we try to take that input in as one part of the many different types of inputs that were coming into this.
I digress.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Further on the declaration, Councilmember Pinto.
Thanks so much, Chairman. And thank you, Councilmember Allen and Councilmember McDuffie for working on this very important issue. And I'm happy that there is hopefully going to be a step towards resolution today to get this relief for some of our smallest restaurants and make sure that they're not being overly burdened and penalized by this protection that we intended to provide last December, but hasn't played out that way. I will say I am a little bit concerned over the long term and excited that there will be a hearing coming up so that we can think about the whole universe of issues for our restaurants and delivery drivers and workers that are still being asked to be resolved. And I guess this is a question perhaps for Councilmember McDuffie, which is that as chair of the Business Economic Development Committee, do you see this emergency as a kind of helpful supplementation of what is to come at this hearing, as in we're not putting folks at risk of passing something today and then a month later doing something different, as was kind of talked about at the breakfast?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Pinto. Thank you for your ongoing engagement around these issues. I know you have perhaps more restaurants than any other ward in the district. And so I appreciate your insights on this. I think the short answer is yes. I think the version, including the amendment to the ANS, I think lays a better foundation for us to move from passage of an emergency to a discussion that is more comprehensive about the restaurant industry, some of the needs that restaurants have expressed, as well as some of the needs that workers have expressed. I think Councilmember Trayon White's concerns that he raised are very valid. I raised some of these last month in the debate around the emergency. And so I do appreciate that Councilmember Allen has made some adjustments that I think are going to be more consistent ultimately with the permanent measures that we take up. And if anybody wants to see the permanent measure that we've introduced, I'm happy to share it to make sure that they have that. And I'd love to welcome you all, as well as any members of the public, to testify when we have the hearing later this month. So I think the short answer is yes. This is, I think, a better version of emergency that will make it less challenging to implement a permanent and perhaps follow up with another emergency that addresses a broader challenges that the restaurant industry have expressed.
Okay, thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, if I can have another minute, because this will save me from asking the question later, which was, Councilor Allen, can you speak to what the amendment will be that you talked about, that there are some substantive changes that were worked out? What are those?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate Councilor Pinto. So just from a procedural standpoint, so to get to the deck first, I can't move the amendment yet, but just what it will be is there'll be two changes. One is defining the radius from 5 miles to 4 miles. And also in terms of replacing some language that will clarify that a third-party meal delivery service shall not exclude any restaurant with whom the third-party meal delivery service has an agreement from a customer within 4 miles of the restaurant.
I see. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you both. I'm looking forward to supporting this today.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further on the declaration, Councilmember Louis George.
I just had a question, a follow-up there from Councilmember Pinto's question. If we shrinking, I guess, why do we need the amendment to go from 5 to 4? Like, why is that 5 to 4? Why would that be needed? Because it feels like that would shrink food delivery options for restaurants, drivers, and patrons. I think, like, I'm thinking practically the smaller radius is fine for people who may live in Shaw, in the center of DC. But if you live on the outskirts of DC, and it really limits your options, because most drivers now won't be able to have an option to provide service. So for example, Shepherd Park in Ward 4 is 7 miles, to DuPont is 7 miles. So basically Shepherd Park can only get food from Adams Morgan, which is up to 4.6 miles. So I'm just curious, and thinking about those of us who represent wards that have on the outskirts, what the thinking is in regard to that, because it seems like that would shrink delivery options for the restaurants, drivers, and patrons in that regard. And so the only party benefiting from the smaller radius would be the delivery platform.
Sure. I appreciate the question. And let me make sure I state that what we're setting is the floor, not the ceiling. So to be clear, that restaurant could certainly, through the app can provide a longer distance than this. What we're doing is not setting the ceiling, but we're setting the floor. So it can be no smaller than 4 miles. And what we've seen is that different apps have different radiuses. So some are at 4, some are at 5. And so for this emergency measure, we're going with 4. And that does not exclude someone who has 5 or 6 or 7 miles as a radius. And then my hunch will be, this will be one of those items that is part of the discussion as we move towards the hearing that Mr. McDuffie referenced, where that radius can be talked about further. But I just want to make sure it's clear that we're talking about the floor, not the ceiling of what that radius is.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Louis George. If there's no further.
Councilmember Parker wishes to be recognized.
Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about some of the language in the amendment. I recall the foundation of this emergency was concern around drivers or restaurants rather facing ever increasing rising fees. And that language seems to have been taken out of the emergency. And so, Councilmember Allen, if you could just speak to why that was taken out, because and why then is this such an emergency? Because I thought that was the reason why we had to take action immediately.
Sure. Is there a certain line you're referencing so I can make sure I'm trying to look at the exact same?
Yep. Give me a second. So obviously we're all just seeing this, so this makes it harder in a moment. But on the bottom of page 3, the language reads that was taken out, reduce the placement of a covered restaurant in any page list or search results, and it goes on. And I recall there being a lengthy back and forth, and the argument that I found compelling and that was echoed by Ward 5 restaurants was in fact that case, that they were being punished by ever increasing fees. And so that this emergency was coming in to kind of provide relief. I imagine that may have been point of the contention between you and Councilmember McDuffie, and that is the reason why it was taken out. My question is then,
I hear your question now. So
what
you're
are we accomplishing if that is taken out?
Got it. Yeah, I hear what your question is. And I think what you're referencing is the oral amendment that is to come later. And that is clarifying that the third-party meal delivery service shall not exclude any restaurant with whom the third-party meal delivery service has an agreement from the search results within the 4 miles of a restaurant, which previously the phrase, well, obviously not previous yet, but once I moved the amendment, was related to, let me make sure I'm reading it correctly, reduce the placement rather than exclude the placement. And so one of the things that we were trying to get at is how we both set up this so that we do not exclude our restaurants from that search engine from within the app. But at the same time, it does obviously, you know, an app that has others be able to pay for higher settings would even in the ANS and in the amendment would be able to have different types of listings. But the goal here was to make sure that a restaurant is not excluded from that third party meal delivery service, because that's what we were doing for restaurants, is that they were being excluded. And even at the what we'll call that basic level of 15%, were being excluded from the algorithm or being excluded from the searchable findings. And in this language, that'll be part of the oral amendment, is what makes sure that it's very clear they cannot be excluded.
Mr. Chairman, if I could have just 15 more seconds. So I do understand the difference in that language. The concern, though, was not that restaurants were excluded from the app, but that they had to be manually entered in the search box in order to be found. And so are we now taking that away as well with this switch in language to exclude it?
That not in my reading, no. I believe that restaurant with this language is still included in that space. And it clarifies that they cannot be excluded.
Okay, I would just say I'm a bit concerned that I think the reason for the emergency is now being undermined in some of these changes. But thank you for that clarification, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the additional time.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker.
I appreciate that. I know that's focused on that one element of the oral amendment. I do want to make sure and stress the multiple other protections for both restaurants and drivers that are in this. So even if that one piece maybe gives you some heartburn over the change, and I think we may be reading it a little differently. There are many other parts within this emergency action that work to protect our restaurants and our drivers that are that I think you share, knowing those are very worthy and necessary now.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, the vote will be on the declaration PR 25-172. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray.
Yeah.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-214. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I need to move the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and then I have an oral amendment that we've also reduced in writing and given to General Counsel that I'll move to procedurally. Do you want me to say so move to the ANS and then move my oral amendment to it?
Yes.
All right. So moved to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. And with that, let me now read the oral amendment, and again, has been reduced to writing for the General Counsel. I move the oral amendment to the underlying ANS, striking the language of subsection E and inserting the following quote, "A third-party meal delivery service shall not exclude any restaurant with whom the third-party meal delivery service has an agreement from a customer within 4 miles of the restaurant," end quote. And additionally, move to strike at subsection F5 and insert 4. And I'm looking to the General Counsel to make sure that's consistent with what she has in writing as
So
well.
what you read on line 78, 79 of the amendment nature of a substitute is a third-party meal delivery service shall not exclude any restaurant with whom the third-party meal delivery service has an agreement from a customer within 4 miles of a restaurant.
Correct.
And the rest of E is struck. And then on line 92, that the number is the number 4 rather than 5.
Correct.
Does any member have a question or want that repeated? Not hearing that. If there's no objection, the oral amendment will be accepted. It's accepted. On the amendment nature of a substitute as amended, is there any further discussion? By a voice vote, all those in favor of the amendment nature of a substitute as amended, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any no votes? The amendment nature of the substitute is approved. Now we have the bill as amended. Further discussion. This is last chance on the bill. Because the declaration was approved unanimously, and so far everything seems to have been a unanimous, we can do the bill by voice vote. The vote is on Bill 25-214 as amended by the amendment nature of a substitute, which was itself amended. All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any no votes? Madam Secretary, I don't see here any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. We'll turn to temporary legislation. If there's no objection, we'll move all 4 in block. That would be number 1, Bill 25-215, which the temporary will conform to the emergency. Is that clear, Madam General Counsel?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Bill 25-253, which is the Housing Authority. Bill 25-249, which is targeted historic preservation. Bill 25-255, which is Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Technical Temporary. There was no objection to all four, and I believe only the food delivery had amendments. Oh, no, Targeted had one as well. It was amended to have the applicability date go back. So we don't have to move all the amendments. We simply are incorporating in my motion the amendments that were approved to the emergency. And I know it drives the secretary crazy, but we'll do a roll call on the temporaries. Is everybody clear what's before us, which is the four temporaries, two of which were amended as emergencies, and so the temporaries will reflect those amendments. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes, and Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
The four measures are approved first reading unanimously. That is going to conclude the business of this legislative meeting. The next regular meeting is June 6th, 2023. We have a additional meeting to vote on the budget scheduled for May 16th and an additional meeting for second reading on the budget, May 30th. Time is 2:07 in the afternoon. This meeting is